Yes, I'm ready. You going to flag me when I start? I'd like to call the meeting to order. Could we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
President Bertoni.
Here.
Director Blost.
Here.
Vice President Britton.
Here.
Director Grab.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Houghton.
Here.
Director Kring.
Here.
Director McNeil.
Present.
Director Wisdom.
Here. Any public input on action items? Seeing none, superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Bertoni. As you know, in our special meeting, we have one agenda item, and that is to begin the 30-day budget process. And so we did the budget presentation last week, but we had a couple of questions that we didn't actually address in the presentation. So we thought we would do, I just called it a budget summary. And I've asked Mr. Mattis just to review just a handful of slides to review that budget summary. And essentially everything we're about to say, board members, you've already seen. You've seen a pandemic plan, you've seen a counselor plan, you've had board retreats relative to finance, and of course you saw the board presentation last week as well as the demographic presentation back in November. So nothing in here is anything that you have not seen. But if we cut over to the budget summary slide, here's the questions. People had said to us, didn't we get federal pandemic money? And because we were doing the budget for next year, we didn't really talk about that. So I thought, well, let's just talk about that before you do this vote. The second thing people said is DASD still growing. Now, we've seen our demographic study back in November, but we thought we'd address that in a slide as well. Then also, did we spend the 2021 budget? And of course, the short answer to that is no, we didn't spend all that money, but we didn't talk about that again in our budget presentation because it was focused on next year. And then we'll just show you those revenues and expenditures one more time. So with that said, Mr. Mattis, would you just review your handful of slides?
Thank you, Dr. Lenardi. We'll start off by talking about our pandemic revenues or pandemic funds that we received from the federal government. You can see up here a list of the categories that we spent money on. We received about 5 grants totaling about $3 million. We tried to summarize them by these categories and sort them by low expenditure to high expenditure. And as you would expect, we spent a lot of money on PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, visors, a lot of plexiglass to separate, to put on student desks, separate them, create a barrier between students, create plexiglass on teachers' desks, student tables, work tables, cafeteria tables. I mean, just a lot of plexiglass everywhere. Our custodial staff and maintenance staff did a terrific job getting our classrooms and our cafeterias ready for students. I mean, just, they moved heaven and earth to get things ready. They did just a terrific job. So you can see the different categories we had for, thermometers. We had to give some money to non-public schools as part of their PPE. That came out of some of our grants. But also, we spent a lot of money on technology. If you recall, we didn't have a complete one-to-one program in our district. Elementary at the kindergarten AM sessions shared devices with the kindergarten PM session. So when we sent everybody home in last March, we didn't have enough devices for all our students. So, we had devices maybe for the AM kindergartners, but not devices for the PM kindergartners. So Dr. Matei went out, bought some used equipment so that we could provide devices for one-on-one, get students online. And thankfully, it's lasted so far this school year. We've got it done, but we need to upgrade and get better equipment for next year. If the board recalls, back in February, March timeframe, you gave us authorization to do some advanced purchasing. So we know we have long lead times getting things in from overseas. We hope to get those devices in July and August so that we can outfit them, set them up for our network, and have them ready for the first day of school next year. Because we still don't know what's going to happen with school next year. We hope it's going to be a normal school year, but You just don't know. So we're trying to plan for the worst. Also, we used money for summer school program. We have a summer school program, an enhanced summer school program coming up this summer. We also used it for curriculum writing for our cyber academy. So we had more elementary students taking advantage of our cyber academy this year. So overall, you can see the three major expenditure categories: PPE, about $820,000 spent; technology, about $1.5 million; curriculum and summer school, about $600,000. Total, almost $3 million. As Dr. Lenardi said, we completed a enrollment projection, a demographic study this past November. And over the past 10 years, we grew by about 1,159 students from 2010-11 through this last month, March 1st. And interestingly enough, we lost about 150 students this school year. So we had some students go to private schools, parochial schools, charter schools. So our enrollment is actually down 150 students this year compared to this time last year. But anecdotally, parents are talking to principals, parents are talking to Dr. Lenardi. They're saying, hey, if we have a normal school year next year, the kids are coming back. Students are coming back to Downingtown. So we need to plan for that. The other part of our enrollment study looked out into the future. What's going on with housing developments? You know, new houses usually bring in more students to our school district. So it looks like about 900 additional students will be growing in Downingtown between now and 2029-30 because we completed a demographic study in 2019-20. That's why we go out through 2029-30. So that would bring us at about 13,900, rounded off to maybe 14,000 students as we look out to 2029-30. So we are definitely growing. We see that in our revenues. We have good revenue growth in real estate taxes, but we also have expenses that go along with the additional students coming into our school district. Okay, so if we look at where we are with this year's budget, our current year budget, 2020-21, we're projecting total revenues, we budgeted for total revenues of $224.7 million, total expenses, $233.6 million, and we combine general fund and capital fund because we think that's a true accounting of what our expenses are. So we wanted to show that to the board and public. So if those two numbers would pan out, total revenues and total expenses as budgeted, we would have about an $8.8 million deficit. We had some good news. Well, let me back up a second. As you recall, as we developed the budget for this year, this time last year, March and April of last year, COVID was hitting, the pandemic was hitting, we were closing schools, we were thinking, geez, we're going to close school for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and we'll be back at it. That didn't happen. But we were also planning for kind of the worst case scenario economically. We thought, geez, if the pandemic is hitting, are we going to have a repeat of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009? So we pulled back revenues. Maybe our real estate taxes weren't going to come in as planned. Maybe earned income taxes weren't going to come in as planned. We also reduced our expenses. If you remember, we reduced our capital spending from $10 million for current year down to $7 million for the current year. So those numbers are reflected in the revenues and expenses that you see up there. So that brought us to a budgeted deficit of $8.8 million. Thankfully, our revenues have not been impacted by this. We see very strong real estate tax revenue this year. We also see strong earned income tax growth this year. So that is bringing in revenues of $4.5 million over what we budgeted for 2024, or the $224.7 million. So that's helping to reduce the deficit. Also, the silver lining for COVID is we're not spending as much money as we had anticipated when we developed the budget. We're not spending as much money in transportation. We're not spending as much money in utilities, travel, because of COVID. All those things are savings. We also had extra expenses because of COVID. We had to hire additional substitute teachers, substitute aides. We had curriculum writing that we wrote off some of the expenses to the grants that we just talked about, and custodial overtime for deep cleaning. But when we net all that together, we have an improvement in revenues of about $4.5 million and about $3 million less in expenses than we anticipated. So that has a positive budget variance of about $7.5 million. So we're projecting a deficit for the current year of about $1.3 million. That's very doable for a budget of our size. That's not a big deal. We can absorb a $1.3 million deficit. So if we would have had a normal school year, we think the projection would have been about a $4 million deficit. Okay, so let's move on and talk about next year's budget. So as we put together total revenues for next year, $235 million, and total expenses, as we said, we combined general fund and capital fund to give you a total picture, about $244.25 million. Our projected deficit for next year is about $9.2 million. And again, we're assuming a normal school year. We're proposing a 3% tax increase, which would bring in about $4.5 million in additional real estate taxes. So that would cut the deficit about in half. So the deficit after a 3% tax increase would be about $4.7 million. We also looked at looking back in history, if there are no tax increases in future years, and we know we've had the past 8 years with no tax increases. So what's been going on in this past 8 years? The blue bars show that we have had a budget surplus over the past several years where revenues exceed expenses. That's always a good thing. In your personal finances, your household finances, when revenues exceed expenses, that's a good thing. But what we see with the blue bars is the trajectory is a downward trajectory. So we have less of a surplus as we get closer to the current year. And our current year, again, 2020, 2021, about a $1.3 million projected deficit. And then in future years, we see that the deficit would continue to grow if we don't have a tax increase. And as we could see up above, we had our expenses over the past 10 years have grown by about 3.6% per year, revenues by about 2.4% a year. So that's why you see the downward trajectory of revenues exceeding expenses in the past leading up to the current fiscal year. As we talked about before, Act 1 does not allow school boards to have unlimited taxing powers anymore. That used to be the case, but since 2006, that is no longer the case. So for next year, the maximum tax increase would have been about 3.6% with a base inflation index of 3% and some exceptions for special education of about 0.6%. If we don't look at tax increases at some point in the future, our deficits are going to continue to grow. We're going to have to use our capital fund balance to fund current expenses. So we won't have money or as much money available for future renovations of our schools and expansions of our schools if we have to.
So our final slide there says administrative recommendations. We haven't changed our recommendation. We believe that this is the year that we need a tax increase. We actually think it was last year, but with the pandemic, we just couldn't, it didn't make sense to recommend it. There was too many uncertain things, but we knew we were getting to that deficit piece. So we waited a year, didn't raise last year. That made it 8 years. So now year number 9, we're suggesting that we increase taxes. So what you have on your agenda, board members, are, of course, preliminary approval tonight, and then we have to wait 30 days. So it is very helpful if you vote on the budget, if you approve some budget tonight so that our 30-day clock, as it starts ticking, we can do the final one. The one that really matters is May 12th because that's the final. Once we vote on that, then it doesn't change. But between now and then, anything can change. Whatever you want us to do, we can do. May 12th is when it's final. But to approve tonight starts the 30-day clock, and then that way we don't get behind. Because as you know, and I think Director Kring, it was your idea to push the budget back a month, and that's really helpful because it allows us to order sooner, go after new personnel sooner, and so, we're competing with all the surrounding districts, so that part's pretty helpful. So we'd like to stay on track for the April, May approvals, but the final approval is really the one whereby after that, we can no longer change the budget. So I'll stop there and either take questions now, or Dr. McNeil, you can move to the agenda item and take questions then, either one.
Well, we have to approve something. You'd like us to approve, so I would say
Okay. Yep, that's an idea.
Okay. Request approval of the resolution adopting the district's 2021-2022 proposed final budget in the amount of $244,248,119 with a 3% tax increase.
Do I have a second? Second. Wisdom. All right, now's discussion. Question, Vice President Britton.
Mr. Matt, can you hear me? Mr. Matt, yes, can you tell me 3% to the homeowners at home? That might seem scary to them. Can you tell me what the average increase to the average homeowner would be?
For the typical homeowner in Downingtown, a 3% tax increase would be about $150, about $50 for every 1%.
So $150 a year, and I'm really terrible at math. What's that equate to a month?
$12, $13 a month.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Director Crane?
I have a bunch of comments, so I'll defer if anybody else has a comment first.
So, may I go, or?
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to know if the slide that you're showing the deficit decreasing, or increasing rather, it's slide 6. Does that assume that we continue to spend $2.5, $3 million on new staff?
Yes, about $2 million per year on staff.
Doc,
Thank you.
Mr. Mattis, when you go out, are you assuming that we're continuing to add staff, or that's with a hiring freeze, we're still going to continue to run, the deficits are still going to get larger and larger?
Even with a hiring freeze, the deficits would continue to get larger because you have contracts, salaries and benefits are going to continue to grow. The assumptions there in the red bars are that we would add about $2 million per year in additional staffing. Obviously it would be dependent upon enrollment and so forth, but that was the assumption going out.
So if we were to back off hiring off that number to 2.5 million, the deficit wouldn't look quite so bad.
Yes, the deficits would be, let's say, $2 million less per year in the out years.
And did that slide take into account too, you mentioned that we had strong real estate and earned income tax revenues this year. Does that take into account that kind of increase each year?
Yes, it does. We feel we're very aggressive with projecting real estate taxes, meaning we're pushing the envelope a little bit, maybe beyond our comfort level with what revenues might be in the future. But yes, we have growth in real estate taxes, about 1.2% a year. Earned income taxes going up 3 to 4% a year.
Thank you.
Does this allow for maintenance on our buildings and expansion of our buildings?
It does reduce our capital spending to about $6 million per year in the out years. So it would provide for basic maintenance, but not much else.
No construction at all in here.
No construction.
So, I mean, from my perspective, that is a concern for me. We had, even in this pandemic year, an increase of 130 students at the secondary level. We brought back many children in our low incidence classes, which adds to the numbers at our high schools. And I think we have to be realistic in that we need to consider the growth for that. And I know a number of board members are interested in all-day kindergarten, which when we start that will require us hiring a number of teachers. And because we are limited by the Act 1 index, we can't jump taxes any more than, what's been the average? I mean, 3% is unusual. I mean, the last few years, hasn't it been 2.3?
For the Act 1 base index?
Yeah.
Yes, this is the 3% is the highest it's been probably in the last 5 years.
So we would be hard pressed to forget about any building staff for any future growth in that area. That said, I am concerned if we raise tax and hire, we're not doing anything to build that growth. So that's my struggle.
So I remember we had a conversation about the financial issue in 2008, huge hit the real estate market really severely, and that we didn't feel that as a school district until 2010, 2011 maybe?
Correct.
It was a couple of years later.
Yes.
So I guess some of my apprehension is around, I know we're doing okay now because there are pockets of our district where people might be more doing better financially than in other parts of our district. And I wonder if we might be feeling this, the impact of this pandemic soon, if not right now. I'm just wondering what your experts, the business managers across the county and maybe even the state are projecting about that.
Well, we are cautiously optimistic right now because of, the federal stimulus that's on the front burner at this point. There's talks about infrastructure spending. The real estate market in general has been very hot. Interest rates are low, which is increasing the value of houses. Housing construction is up. So it's a complete flip of where we were in 2008, 2009. The real estate market is very solid, very hot. Talking with Director Kring a little bit, earned income taxes seem to be stable in the area. So, the outlook for the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months seems to be solid financially as far as overall economics across the country. So if we listen to the pundits and we believe what they're saying, then it sounds like we should be in very solid territory economically as a country.
Thank you.
Mr. Mattis?
Oh, sorry.
Looking at expenses and growing by 3.6% and our revenues by 2.4%, what's our biggest growth in expenses? What have we really, where has that money really gone to?
Well, over the years, it has been salaries and benefits. Those, without a doubt, that's the main driver in a school district. We are labor intensive as an organization. So contracts for salaries, healthcare benefits obviously are expensive. Over the past 10 years, retirement expenses have been an issue that has calmed down quite a bit in more recent years as the state pension plan has caught up financially. So that's much better. But, adding staff each year, that's a cost driver, and just basic contracts are going up,
So if we continue to grow and we have more children, we're just going to have more of those expenses.
We will.
That's right.
Because even though we have housing growth, which brings in more revenue, more earned income taxes, if a typical house is paying $5,000 in real estate taxes, and let's say they're paying another $1,000 in earned income taxes, so maybe a new house is going to generate $1,000 in new revenue to the school district. But if they have a student that's going to come to our schools, we know our tuition rate, if we just take our total budget divided by total enrollment, it's about $15,000 to educate a child. So there's that imbalance there. So that's why it takes many houses plus a mixture of businesses to educate one child in any school district. That's not unique to Downingtown, but we are more of a bedroom community than some other school districts. Westchester has more commercial property, Tredyffrin, Easttown. So we don't have that as good of a mix of commercial and residential properties as some other districts might.
Thank you.
Just a second. Director Grab and then Director Gibson.
Just to piggyback off of Director Bluff, and our expense increase, how much of that increase also has come from general inflation of costs?
You're correct. I mean, general inflation, I don't know, the last several years, 1.5% to 2%, depending on what it might be. You know, food sometimes has higher inflation rates. Technology can sometimes deflate, you know, so a market basket might be, you know, between a 1.5% to 2%. But that's definitely a cost driver. Obviously, we've been trying to add buses, so that's a cost driver in our transportation department to try to reduce the ride times for our students, particularly at Marsh Creek. So that, you know, that's another underlying inflation factor beyond general inflation.
Director Gibson?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, this 3% would essentially, just to keep the status quo, we wouldn't be able to hire more people, it wouldn't consider any construction, population growth. So I'm curious, we did a lot of construction in the last few years with no tax increase. We built onto STEM, we built Euclid Hills. How are projects like, to explain a little bit, because I know a lot of people are interested in a 5-6 center. A lot of people want full day kindergarten. It's really hard to say the 3% is just going to keep us even, but not really going to go into improving some of the things we have going on. So I'm curious as to how we didn't raise taxes for 8 years and somehow managed to do some major construction projects. And now we're talking about hiring freezes and no construction and increased population and a 3% tax raise.
Yes, as you know, the slide that's up on the board now is a good overall indicator. Over the past 8 years when we have not had a tax increase, overall we have had budget surpluses, meaning revenues exceeded expenses in all those years. If we look up through 2013, 14 through the current school year, again, revenues are exceeding expenses, so that's a good thing. So we are not only covering our current expenses for each fiscal year, we're putting money in the bank as well. So we're putting money in our capital fund to pay for construction, roofing projects, those kind of things. So we do have a healthy fund balance in capital right now. And we used some of that money, I think it was about $15 or $16 million to add on to STEM. We paid for the STEM project with cash. So we didn't have to borrow any money. So that's a wonderful thing because that keeps your overhead down. Your principal and interest payments on your debt don't go up because you're renovating or adding on to a school. Euclid Hills, I think the price tag on Euclid Hills Elementary was $35 million. We did borrow money for Euclid Hills Elementary. So if we would do something in the future with building another school, doing something at the high schools, it's a whole conversation that we need to have. We can use cash to maybe do the high schools or another elementary school and borrow some money to do the rest. So there's a lot of options that we have, and we're lucky because we have money in the bank and we can do that kind of thing. The problem that we're worried about is as we get to the out years, when we see the red bars where we have deficits continue to grow over time, that we're going to be drawing down on our savings account and we won't have money to reinvest into our schools with roofing projects and expansion for new kids, additional enrollment growth. And I should say too, in our budget this year, we've budgeted for $2 million worth of new staff. So that is in the budget that we have up there. And Kevin, I don't know if we can go back one slide. So you can see that we have a deficit before we have, let me just show, we have about a $9.2 million deficit before a 3% tax increase. 3% brings in about $4.5 million. So our deficit would be roughly cut in half to about $4.7 million. And that includes enough money for $2 million of new personnel in next year's budget.
Can I, Mr. Mattis, when did the Act One index law go into effect?
I think it was voted on in 2006 and went into effect in 2007. So 2007, 2008, I think, was the first year schools fell underneath that umbrella.
So to answer, from my estimation, Rachel, and I may not be giving you completely accurate information, and I ask Mr. Mattis to correct me if I'm wrong, because I moved here in 1988. So back then, there was no Act One index, and our taxes would go up far more than 2% every year. And when I started going to board meetings in the 90s, every year it was, we're running a deficit, we're running a deficit. Well, we wound up with a very healthy fund balance. So for the last, and the reason we had a fund balance was because we were not spending what we were bringing in, and we also were not maintaining the buildings quite the way they should have been. When I first got on the board, we spent about, $500,000 for, at that time, was probably 13 buildings, which was not enough money to maintain it. So the board, over those 8 years, worked on getting a whole facilities plan. You've seen it, where every year we do a different roof and whatever, and we spend about $10 million, and our buildings are really where they need to be. But over that time, we also opened up a 6th grade center, which that extra money that was going into capital is now paying for salaries. So we're kind of where the rubber hit the road. And, greater minds can talk about how, well, we should have been increasing taxes the last 8 years, but we didn't. So, and then there are those that say you shouldn't spend money, that you shouldn't be raising taxes if you don't need the money. So, it's the chicken and the egg argument to at a certain level. But we're at a point now where it doesn't balance anymore. And I'm very concerned about the long-term financial prospects for the district. I mean, we were a rapidly growing district and with a lot of children coming in, and it's pluses and minuses. It brought in income, but it brought in children. And, every school district likes 55 plus because it doesn't bring the children in, but that's not what we have here. So there are no easy answers other than we have to really look at what we need for education and go from there. Director Graham?
Can you speak towards how many school districts usually borrow money for large capital improvement projects such as building new schools or additions versus having cash on hand to pay for them? Because to me, it seems like many school districts probably don't have the cash on hand and do have to borrow money. So how common is that, and how does that impact revenue?
You are correct. Most school districts don't have capital funding set aside like we do. So we are in a great position in those regards. Most school districts, if they have to do a building renovation add-on, will borrow money. Usually, a 20-year bond payment really is the typical thing. So any kind of renovation or major addition is typically for, I'll say, 90+% of the school districts in Pennsylvania is borrowing.
So that doesn't necessarily, the fact that our deficit is still there doesn't necessarily impact future projects, necessarily.
If we don't let the deficit get too far out of balance, we'll be fine. Because what happens is as you have a deficit, so what is a deficit? You have your current expenses. Let's just keep it simple, salaries and benefits, utilities. if you don't have enough revenue coming in to pay those things, you're pulling money out of savings account. You're pulling money out of your vacation account or your college savings account to pay for groceries, if we put it in terms of your household. So that's okay for a short period of time, but you don't want to do that for a long period of time because, as President Bertoni said, with Act 1, you can only tax up to that inflation index, and it takes a long time to dig out of that hole, and you have to make some hard choices on the expenditure side as well. So you might not be hiring people in correlation to your student growth. You might have increased class sizes as a result of that.
And that's the issue is, going forward, if we want to, the building project is not the difficult decision. It's the staffing of the building.
Yep.
That's the
Understood.
difficult position. And that's the problem with this deficit is it's not based on a bond we have to pay off. It's based on salary and benefits. So every person we hire now is going to create a bigger hole.
Understood. Thank you.
Director Bluff?
And to go one step further, wouldn't we need to do an increase every year for the foreseeable future in order to continue to dig ourselves out of this hole?
It depends on what direction we want to go to with the district. If we are, we talked about full-day kindergarten. So if that is a long-term goal of the district, we need space to do that. We need teachers to do that. So we're going to need tax increases for the next several years so that, just as President Bertoni said, we need to be able to afford the people that come with that new building. We would have to hire additional kindergarten teachers if we open up a new building. We have to hire principals, secretaries, custodians, librarians, nurses, all those personnel that go out with outfitting a building beyond, the typical classroom teachers. So if that's a major goal for the district of opening up a new building, providing full-day kindergarten, yes, there's going to be tax increases for the next several years so that we can afford the staffing and the principal and interest payments, because I would see at some point that we would do some borrowing. It might not be for the full amount of a building, but maybe a portion of the building.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we would build with just cash because we'd wipe out our fund balance completely, and that wouldn't be smart either. So we'd have to do some level of
We
borrowing.
have spent it down over the years so that it isn't as high as it once was.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Director McNeil?
Thank you, President Bertoni. Mr. Mattis, may I ask, on page 2, the slide about the federal grants, is that amount of money all that we got, so there is a zero balance in that grant, on those grant funds?
Yes, I'll say that's yes, because these funds are either spent or they're obligated.
Okay.
Let's look at the very last line, the anticipated IT capital purchases.
Yes.
Oh, go back, slide 2, that's it, thank you. If you recall, the board authorized us to go out in February to put out purchase orders to order that equipment, knowing it has a long lead time. So that $1 million has not left the district bank account yet. But when it comes in this July or August, it'll go out there, but it's obligated at this point.
So those are the funds we got, $2,980,417.
Correct.
Thank you.
Vice President Britton, did you have something? And then Director Gibson again?
I did. I guess I read that the grant required that we spend 20% of our total funds on mental health. Is that not accurate? Because I don't see it in here.
I'm not sure it's that, maybe remediation in general, student. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, it just came out this week, so maybe it
Oh,
hasn't.
wait, no,
Probably
you're,
for additional funds, not
Yeah,
new
for the
funds.
additional funds. This is last year's money.
yeah, we didn't receive any new money yet, and they're
Okay.
holding it, and they're designated to certain things for districts. So no districts have received that.
Right, okay, so this is an accounting of last
Right.
year's money.
Yeah,
I
yeah, current year,
apologize.
current
Thank
year.
you.
Director Gibson?
That addressed my question. I was just verifying that this didn't include the new money that has not been distributed yet. And then for the new money, 20% of that, so maybe 40%, according to what Vice President Britton is saying, has to be allocated to learning loss as well. So those are going to be funds that have to go right back into our programming.
Right.
I believe Downingtown's getting $191 per student.
It's 2.4 million, I think, is what we're expected to get. But we haven't gotten the details on spending yet.
Are there any other questions?
Just me.
Director Crane?
Hopefully I can stay on target here. It could take a few minutes. Mr. Mattis, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for reminding me about last year, the situation we were in, the mindset we were in last year. I was definitely one of those people who said we need to cut our revenue expectations and hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So I spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks looking over the budget and looking over the actuals that we do. So the page 4, we can go to page 4, you might as well bring it up because I'm going to refer to it a few times. That's the budget. It's not the actually what is happening in 20 and 21. This is the 224,739 in revenues, and the expenses of 233,603 are what we had budgeted for last year. But I started with the cash flow that we get every month in the back of our agenda. And according to my calculations, I actually had about $4 million of revenue improvement. You have 4.5, so thanks for that extra $500,000. I really like that. So about $4.5 million extra revenue. Now, the cash flows show us already ahead on revenue and ahead on some expenses over last year. They stay pretty consistent on the cash flow. But we do have an accrued budget, which means that things come in after June 30th that we may already be planning for, so we may know where things are going to be, but every year they seem to be fairly consistent with what the accrual is. We call it a 13 closing. We really don't get those full numbers until September. And so our actuals last year, total revenues were $228.4 million. We have revenue expected this year on the budget of 224.7. But last year, it was 228.4. And we're expecting about a $4.5 million increase of revenue over last year, which would put us over 230 million right there. Further, the actuals on total expenditures last year were 216.5 million. So if we were to expect this year to have total expenses of 233 million, that's a $17 million increase in spending, which I do think we have somewhat of a spending problem, and I'll get to that later, but we don't have that bad of a spending problem. I think we're on target for something close to what we had at the end of last year. I think we may have a slight surplus, not a $1.3 million deficit. And I would recommend that we withdraw this motion and have a motion for a 0% tax increase for the 9th year. And if there is a surplus, any surplus is used to fund the capital projects that we decided to defer over the next 12 months. So I'd like to make that motion when I can. If that's not a motion enough, then I'll do it later. So I said that we do have a little bit of a spending problem. I just want to make this clear. I made it clear last month. Over the course of the no tax increases for the last 8 years, we have increased our spending by about 30%. It's actually over 30% in 10 years, but for 8 years, it's over 30%. So we have increased spending significantly. We're not starving the district. We're providing an excellent responsibly, and we're doing it fiscally responsibly, pardon my grammar. But what we have looking forward, tonight the recommendation was for a tax increase and approve the budget. Last month, it was also to build a $50 to $60 million facility and institute full-day kindergarten just for a start. We also have over $2 million in extra staffing. So last month, I asked for a 5-year breakdown of staffing. And the reason I asked for 5 years in the previous 5 years, the reason I do that as a financial planner is I like to look at historical trends. And for the first part of the 5-year trend, staff growth had been fairly moderate. Since 2017-18, that year ending 6/30/18, enrollment has increased 1.1%. And just 0.1% in the last 2 years. Now, we're down because of the pandemic, so I'll even give that number. I think it's a little over 2%. That, and if you take last year's number pre-pandemic, our enrollment is up 2% since 17-18, if we stay at those figures. So I looked at our staff, and our professional staff, which I understand to be teachers, I may be wrong about who everybody is in there, since 18-19 is up 3%. So it's moderate, it's reasonable. Our support staff since 18-19 is up 12%. And our administrative numbers are up 10% in 2 years and 16% in 3 years, compared to around 2% enrollment growth. So I looked at this another way. Since 2018, we are up 141 students and 121 full-time employed positions. Since June 30th, 2019, we're up 22 students. Again, we're in a pandemic. 22 student increase, but we increased 97 employees. Now, I don't know, I haven't had the time, nor do I have all the information to look into what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong there. But I suggest that we do a top-down review of the organization led by the board. It should be maybe a board goal. Every once in a while, every few years, the board can have a goal of its own. And over the next year, we look at the organization and what are we really doing well? What kind of staffing needs do we have? Where are we growing too much? Where are we growing too little? I'm sure some of those staffing is in technology, where we need the added technology, but is there some kind of staffing that we don't need because of that? I know some of the staffing is mental health, other things like that. But is it all? I suspect that we may find something that may surprise us. So I would like to suggest that we do that. We're going to be looking at a strategic plan in the coming months. I think we really need to take a deep dive into that before we start talking about adding not just more staff, but adding an entire building of new staff, adding all-day K, and building a $50 to $60 million facility. I think that's going to lay out what we have. Dr. McNeil had previously said, I want to have everything in front of me. I totally agree. I think we need to have everything in front of us. And I think that's where I talk about we may have a spending issue. We may not. I don't know. But I'd like to look into it. I don't think we have a revenue issue. And for this year, I would like to propose not having a 3% tax increase, having a 0% tax increase. And again, any of the surplus that needs to go back into our capital budget goes back in there only, and the rest goes into our other fund balances. Thank you.
May I make a comment?
Yes. Vice President Britton.
Thank you. Every year at budget time, I make an impassioned plea to do the right thing and save some money, and every year I fail. Director Kring rightly points out we're not starving the entire district, we're starving certain departments. And the district deliberately and systematically over the last 4 years has added staffing in departments like pupil services. However, when our community has felt crisis or a loss and our children come before us, they keep telling us they feel disconnected and disenfranchised, and that adults in the buildings they feel they are not connected to. And so when I look at this budget and I'm being told Well, this just keeps us from not going in the red. And essentially, we need to add mental health professionals because that's the bulk of what's being put before us. And I know that over the last 4 years, we've only added 13 mental health professionals. And I look at what's coming before us, it's just to create equity in the buildings. That's not the answer. We do need a long-term plan. I understand what Director King is saying. He's saying, as a board, we should be doing an audit of pupil services. I get that. But here we are at the precipice of having to make a decision. And not one person before us has come to the board and said, I'd like to look at this beforehand so that we can be prepared for this year. And so we're being asked to make a decision on 3%. Again, 3% is $12.66 on average per household per month. And so while my family might not be the direct benefit of having additional pupil services, I know that there are people in this community, especially during COVID, who are experiencing isolation, trauma. And when I look at next year, and I look at what has come before us in the past, I feel like Downingtown Area School District is not alone. We're in good company. Nationwide, we already know that kids are experiencing mental health issues, anxiety, depression. They're experiencing trauma. We need counselors. We need psychologists. We need nurses, social workers. And so when we talk about equity in a building, that's every building gets what they need. Not every building gets the same. So we have maybe some buildings, hey, those kids are getting what they need at this juncture. And other buildings, maybe those mental health professionals, pupil services departments are not getting what they need. And the result is poor outcomes for our students. So if someone's asking me to make a $12.66 investment into our community to ensure that we have improved attendance, lower rates of suspension and other discipline issues, improve academic achievement and career preparation and improve graduation rates, I know that under the new state mandate, this is what we're being graded on. And so how do I protect taxpayers? How do I protect students? I personally am willing to make that investment. I can acknowledge that sustainable and effective change takes time and money, but we must be committed to making these steps. And I feel like what's proposed before us is a very important one. And so that's what I wanted to say.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
I would like to propose that we do a 0% tax increase.
That's an improper motion. You have
That's
to
why I'm
motion to
asking, how do
amend.
we do that?
You have to motion to amend.
So,
All right, I motion that we amend what's on the table to take out the tax increase.
is there a second?
And I'm sorry, and I would further like any surplus to go to fund what we took out of capital that was being planned for the year, and then the rest go to our fund balances.
Can you just do the percent for now?
I'm sorry?
If you want to change it to zero, that's not generally how you write a budget motion.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, okay.
Second, Gibson.
So now. So we'll vote
Yeah,
on
I'm
the
not sure,
amended motion.
I'm not sure if it's proper, Dave, to say that, what else you want to do with the money. I think at this point, we probably would want to just say a zero increase, or zero, like for our budgetary purposes.
As a board, we can give direction
Yeah,
another
yeah.
time.
That's fine.
Yeah. I
It
think
doesn't have
that-
to be
okay.
part of the motion. We can have discussion about this.
I am very concerned about, at this juncture, changing the proposal from 3 to 0 because we do not know how that would impact what we've already looked at as far as staffing and what we're taking away from our students. We've looked at multiple budgets, we've looked at who we're hiring, we've looked at personnel, and that was always with this idea of not having this increase in revenue. So will taking a tax increase to zero impact our personnel budget? What will it impact, and how will it impact our students' life over the next year? And I think that's a very important discussion to have.
So, yeah, we could, if we voted on this and you want us to provide that next week, we could do that. But just in short, the short answer is all new personnel would come out of the budget. That would be 2 million. And then probably we would gut the capital as much as possible to try and get to the rest. They would be our 2 areas left, I think. Because we're already with our regular ongoing like building budgets and departmental budgets, we already told people that we're going from what was 59 million down to 53, and we're really still struggling to get to that 53. So we're still cutting. So I think it would be, those 2 areas would be the obvious 2 choices. But we can show you that in black and white, but just to give you a quick answer.
It really is hard for me to hear you say that when people say that they are so concerned about our students' mental health, and that will directly impact their mental health by taking resources away from them.
Other comments and questions?
Just a question, are we talking about an actual cut or a cut in the growth? One of the things that I forgot to bring this up, the 2022 budget has expenses of $244 million, which is $28 million increase from the end of last year, $28 million. So that's, I don't have my calculator on me, but that's probably an 11% increase in expenditures in 2 years. We're not going to hit that unless we really try, and spend money, but.
I don't have that in front of me.
Director Craig, and just a reminder too, that we combine the general fund and capital fund expenditures together. So that's partly what's driving that big expenditure increase.
Okay.
I'd like to
Just to try to show you the total financial picture, because, we adopt the capital budget and we also adopt the general fund budget. So we thought we'd combine the 2 for ease of analysis.
I'm very concerned about cutting all the capital improvements. I've seen what our buildings are like when they're not maintained, and I do not want to go back there. Vice President Britton?
I just wanted to offer to the conversation that conversations where drastic cuts are being offered out feel scary to me. Director Grayeb said, how is this going to impact the district? Well, we've heard how it's going to impact the district. We're basically saying our children and protecting the taxpayers under the new mandates from the state are not going to be the priority. That's scary. I think every student deserves school-based mental health services and staff to meet developmental, psychological, and their functional needs, and that employees have to have a reasonable caseload to do that. This is the budget conversation every year. It's the nexus between school climate, mental and emotional health, pupil services, staffing, and student achievement. And I personally feel like that department is being neglected. And I'd like the opportunity to make it right in the year of the pandemic. I think our kids are worth it.
Right. I would just like to point out that if we're talking about year-over-year budgets, and I think this year, we're probably going to come in, we're expecting 233 in the budget, but that's a high number. If we're going to expect, let's just say 200, and I'm going to throw this number out there, it might be a little high still, 228 million, including capital projects, and next year it's going to be 244 million. That's not a cut, that's an increase of $16 million. So I understand what you're saying, but it's not a cut. We're not cutting the budget.
Dr. McNeil?
I just wanted to echo Director Kring's sentiment that we're not sure if we have a spending problem or we don't. I know that administration has done an excellent job this year of really taking a good look at the staffing budget and also the principal's operational budgets, as everybody in the district's operational budget. But I guess my worry is that this year, even with cutting back, we have 23 positions that we're approving. I know some of them are contingency. If needed, we'll find out, whether or not they are needed. And to Director Kring's point of a long-range plan, what about when we have to add, assuming we're all in favor of full-day kindergarten, 20 kindergarten teachers? Is that going to be 20 plus 23? So that's 43 teachers that year. I mean, without a plan, I'm not sure what that looks like. And I don't know that any district can withstand that kind of hiring with, current economic situations. And I know that $50 per 1% millage increase is typical. Some people would find that not a problem. Other people might find that a problem. And that's just typical. Many of our families live in homes where it's higher than the average assessed value. So this is going to impact, my point is, this is going to impact everyone differently. Although we are used to in Downingtown an excellent education. And that's where I struggle with a 0% increase, because I was very concerned to hear Mr. Lauber say that we're putting off east windows yet again. And we are crossing our fingers for LMS and DMS's boilers. That is not the way I would run my household. So I am thinking that's not the way we should be running a school district. We should have sufficient funds and plan ahead for those things. So I know we have a motion on the table, but I'm not the Roberts Rule expert, so I'm not sure what happens if there is some median ground between 0 and 3%.
Well,
Thank you.
And after 13 years, I'm still not a Robert Rules expert either, but my understanding is we can vote this motion up and down and then start over with another motion.
Well, she can also amend the motion and see if she gets a second.
Right, but
It doesn't matter.
No,
We already had
let's-
the original motion, which was for 3%, and he amended it. Therefore, she can do the same thing. If she wants to throw another, if she has a second, we can.
Can we compromise?
I was going to say, I would like to vote it down and then start with the
Okay.
next. Vote it up or down and then go on to the next. That's the cleanest way, otherwise we're never actually voting on any. Is that correct? Dr. Knight?
I'll do whatever
We should
you
have probably done it the first
tell me.
time,
I'm not the
the
expert.
3%.
Then you should have done it the first time. We should have had a clean vote and not allowed the amended
So
motion.
we should allow another amendment? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, we didn't vote
How
on
many
the first one.
Yeah, I know, so, yeah.
If she gets a second, then it's
Okay.
clean.
Thank you, Vice President Britton. I was just checking with Dr. Lenardi. So,
So may I amend the motion?
sure. Obviously you
Okay, if I
can.
can find it
Again,
now.
not being the Robert Rules.
Okay, so I request that the motion be amended to read the same for the budget amount with a 1.5% tax increase.
Second plus?
I have a question, Mr. Mattis. If, because we're getting federal funds that can be used for, one of the roles is going to be mental health, can we earmark $1 million of that dollars that they will go for these behaviorists and some of these counselor positions for this year? And if we were to do that, what would be the percent increase if it was $1 million less?
I think I would counsel you against doing that.
Okay.
Because
It's just a
it's
question.
one-time money, and, you add
Oh,
a position,
Yeah.
it's recurring.
No, I understand that, but I also, understand that we'll have a better idea of our finances after the pandemic and next year, and we have attrition every year. If it got that we couldn't afford to continue, we would move people. That's what we do now. So, okay, we'll move this counselor over here because this counselor's retiring. I was thinking it wouldn't in any way change our our trajectory for next year.
Well, if we would do what you're proposing, that we had the discipline to, as somebody retired, not replace them, then it would probably be fine. But we, like I said.
So
we
I
just-
don't think that would work with our new positions, though. I think these would be additional positions. Like, they're not, so I guess I'm a little confused about how that would work. I mean, they strongly suggest against hiring personnel because it's one-time money and next year it goes away. So if we hired, for instance, we wanted a new home and school visitor because we're expecting that to be a big issue next year. So then at the end of the year, what happens? We would, like, how would we, that person would go away because we wouldn't have any more money, and how would we do that? We'd have to take another position doing something else. Like, I'm just not clear on how that would work.
Well, I'm just trying to balance out what our
Yeah.
needs are and what our wants are, and because, what I'm hearing from administration is if we don't give them the full 3%, then either we're not getting professional staff that we might need if our enrollment goes up, or we're not getting the mental health services that you're saying we need. So, or we're going to cut more of our capital, which to me is just dire. I remember a principal standing in front of us saying, can somebody explain to me why I have 7 trash cans in my school every time it rains? And that's when we started the whole roofing program. So I don't want to go back there. And it's very alarming to me that you're talking about cutting it back to $6 million.
May I? I get, again, I think I said this earlier, it's a sense of fear. So we've had 30 days that we knew that this was coming, and we had ample time to call a meeting and have discussions as a board to talk about what should we cut, what could we cut out of a budget. And here we are at the final hour, randomly and arbitrarily, just saying, okay, let's meet in the middle at 1.5. Well, what is the proposal we're taking off the table? I also would like to do some protecting of the administrative staff. So if we keep the mental health services and we don't do the administrative staff that we're asking to be added, there's implications of that as well. And listen, after this vote, if someone said, I might make a motion. I would love to know. I would love to have an audit of how we can do improvements. But it's not like the budget is a new thing. The budget comes up every year in the exact same month. And we're, like many people on this board are a new board, so it feels maybe like this surprised you. It's a reoccurrence. And as someone who's in, this is her 4th budget, I feel like the time to have these conversations has come and gone. And this feels unfair to me because I could have said, hey, as a team, hey team, where are we cutting? What are we cutting? And then we could have a robust discussion and we could have made decisions that are in the best interest of taxpayers. Instead, we have different ideas floating around. I don't know what the right idea is, but it feels late to me.
So this is where we are, folks, at this late hour. And we can agree or disagree on how we got here. So I have a motion for 1.5% and a second. Do I have
I'd like to amend the motion.
Hang on a second. Okay, I'm in Robert's Rules for
That's what I was
Dummies.
just doing.
And you can only, it says here, so in making a motion to amend, can be amended, but only one amendment to an amendment can be considered at any one time.
Right, so I would go back to my original, let's vote the 0% up or down.
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wisdom, for
Thank
your wisdom.
Robert's Rules for Dummies.
You are now the Robert's Rules.
Yes, thank you. I didn't think it.
Can I make a comment? It was suggested this is the last minute. This is not the last minute. Which is the reason I asked for this budget presentation a month earlier this year, because we always were doing it at the last minute. And some of these points were made last month. This year, I believe we're going to have a surplus. Simple as that. I am not willing to ask taxpayers for more. There's nothing that says a government entity just needs to increase the revenue that they take from their constituents. I'm not going to ask them for more this year in a pandemic year when they already believe we haven't been delivering the services that we contracted to them. And likely, not only we have a surplus, but we're sitting on tens of millions, nearly $100 million in savings.
So what you're saying is we can not take a vote tonight, and we could take it in next week or in 30 days?
No, I'm-
And we could still be in compliance with the law?
No, yeah, actually, we haven't.
Well, that is true.
Well, then, we could do that. Let's decide what we are comfortable spending and send them back to the table and approve that.
Well, I think this is about a tax increase or no tax increase.
well,
'cause
then
the
let's
budget
call the
numbers-
vote.
Well, because the budget numbers are not going to be on target.
Yeah, at this point, we have a motion and let's call a vote.
So we're calling the vote.
0% taxing.
So the
I'm
budget
sorry,
amount
so-
stays the same, but it's a 0% tax increase? Is that the motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank
So
you.
a yes is to not increase taxes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Just want to make clear, okay. I make it absolutely clear.
Can you hear all this, Director Gibson?
I can hear.
Thank you. Call the vote, please.
Director Blusk,
No.
Director Kring,
Yes.
Director McNeil,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Wisdom,
No.
Director Houghton,
No.
Director Grab,
No.
Vice President Britton,
No.
President Bertoni.
No.
6-3, the motion fails.
Is there another motion on the table or another discussion? Mr. Mattis, when is the latest that we can approve a preliminary? That would be, I know that districts don't like to do that because we have to get our tax bills out. So the latest would be May's meeting and then
30th.
we would be, well, but for
Well, no,
argument's
it'd be
sake, May
30
5th,
days.
whatever our meeting is in May.
So it would probably be the first meeting in May,
Yeah,
and
we-
then approve the final budget the second at the board meeting in June.
At the board meeting in June.
Probably give us 30 days. I have to look at the calendar.
Only because our June board meeting is the 16th because of commencement, we might be able to do it at the May board meeting. I have to count the days to be sure. Either committee of the whole next month, or the board meeting. But we can also do it tonight to keep us on track, because it's not final till next month. So whatever we do, and that's for the purpose of, as I said earlier, of
So-
purchasing and.
So my next question is then, if we entertain another motion, or we go back and entertain the 3%, and the preliminary budget passes, over the next 30 days,
Yes.
we can lower it?
Yes.
We can,
You can't raise it, but you can lower it.
so it goes back to like the Act 1 index, when we agree not to take exceptions, we can lower it, we don't have to take the full amount, but we can, we set it from there.
Yes.
So remember at the beginning, I said it, May 12th, that's really, whatever we vote then, that counts, that sticks. Tonight, after tonight, this can be changed. So whatever we vote tonight, next week, we'll talk more about it, and then in May, we'll have the final vote, and that's the one that we'll want to be certain we like.
Am I still allowed to ask questions on the budget, or is it because there's nothing on the table to vote on? Because it failed the motion, or do we have to make a new motion to have a
Well, the
discussion?
3%, is that back on does it revert to that?
It reverts back to
Yeah.
3%, and then we had a second motion, but we haven't accepted that because we voted on it. So do we want, is there another motion on the table?
May
Or we
I-
revert back to 3%? And go ahead, you can make a
Can I
comment.
ask a question? Okay. My memory fails me. How many mental health professionals are we being asked to approve? And do you know the total, how much money that is?
It looks like we're looking at 7. 3 behavior support specialists, a school psychologist, 2 school counselors, and I would put the home and school
Yeah,
visitor in that
I would too, yeah.
category.
Mhm. And, well, would you put the 3 health room nurses in there?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so it's 10.
10. And do we know what that total amount is offhand?
Well, no.
Well, assuming on average it's about $70,000, I would say $700,000, $800,000, is that
And-
the goal?
So we'll just say 1 million, clean number? And then, do we know offhand how many administrators that we're being asked to approve?
Just the one temporary psychologist for 1 year.
And we included that in there,
Yeah,
and,
that's the only
and
administrative
the other, I would
position.
say 1 million, because I would think we really, how many teachers, whether they're autistic support, secondary or elementary, what is the, what is the board comfortable with in contingency teachers?
Yeah, 10 of those are contingency teachers, so
Well,
between may or
12,
may not
right? Because
use.
the 2 autistic support are contingency also.
Right, 12, sorry, 12. Well, one of those is definitely going to be used, but.
Okay, so
we.
we know we need at least one. Right.
So I'm looking for a number to support that. Are we saying, like, I'd like to have a round number to make this easy, because it's my understanding for every 1%, we're bringing in $1.5 million in revenue, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm looking to kind of get a feel of what people really want. So we're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it's the right number.
So, and from my perspective and what I struggle with is I truly believe this board is talking about all-day kindergarten, that we need to start building in a base for that staff also, because we'll get to the point, for argument's sake, you build the building, but then you can't raise taxes enough to pay for the staff. So to that point, I think that's why I wasn't opposed to 1.5%, because it would also give us some additional funds that we earmark for starting to build that base.
And that's why the 5-year plan that Director Kring suggested is so essential, because perhaps we could start hiring some kindergarten teachers now. I don't know, can our title schools accommodate another full-day kindergarten classroom within their buildings? I don't know. I know that some of our schools have less enrollment than others. Would it be a possibility to start something just so that we could get some staff hired along the way? I'm just talking off the top of my
Well,
head here, but I'm just
to your point, I
thinking.
would suggest maybe not specifically kindergarten, just primary. And perhaps they could be used to support our math curriculum where we don't have math specialists yet and that type of thing. But understanding that they're not permanent positions in a building, they're
Well,
going to
you
move.
have to be careful about that.
Right.
You know,
President
and
Bertoni.
No, I understand that, so.
I'm so hesitant in having this like conversation about all-day K in terms of how many teachers we need. Other districts are doing creative things where they're having a full-time teacher that's certificated to teach in that role, but then they rotate children out with like an aide so that they have more time to do social, emotional, balanced play. So that's a way to keep costs low and still provide the services and give kids what they need.
But you still have to start
So
building in a base
I
or whatever help
totally
it is.
agree, but it sounds very fearful when you're like, oh, we're going to need to add 40 teachers. I'm throwing out a number.
Yeah, I think.
I'm
there's
not
ways-
fearful at all, I'm stating the
Yeah,
obvious.
just to clarify that, I think when we showed our budget, and of course, the budget we showed for out a couple of years, if we would do 5, 6, and have all day K, and I feel like 17 K teachers is what stuck in my mind. What does it need, what do we need to, if we went full day K?
I think you're correct. I
Is
think
it 17? Yeah.
17 to 20.
But that's in addition to the other staff that you request every year.
And
No,
that's and
Yeah,
that
that's not in
doesn't-
here anywhere.
Right.
And that,
yeah.
right, and that doesn't
That
count
was my
for,
point.
Yeah.
that doesn't account for all the specials and everything else if we do a 5-6 center. It doesn't account for the additional principal, assistant principal.
I think it's another 7.1 million.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not so worried about the 17 teachers, to be honest.
The other thing I'd just like to bring up is central office asks for some support. And I feel like there's benefit for taxpayers in some of these roles and for staff. And And so I'm specifically, I'm interested in talking about adding to, our public outreach team. What's your department?
I'm very reluctant to open the door on every other position that was on that list. And that's
I
why,
understand, but
quite
I'd like to
frankly-
make a motion. I'm just
Right.
trying to get to the bottom number of what I'd like
Right,
to
but-
make a motion for.
but frankly, Vice President Britton, I kind of do not appreciate you saying that these are last-minute questions, because we've gone over these lists over and over again. So we have had conversation.
Yeah,
and
but
some
we've never
people don't
voted, and I
feel-
think that every board member has, first of all, we have a lot of new board members. And they have a lot to learn. It took me 4 years to learn that I am in charge of the possibilities in the conversation. And each board member also needs to come to a finding where they understand that. We're not just tied to the people with the most experience and what they know. We can have conversations.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a motion, and since we waited to this juncture, I'd like to have those, an additional 2 seats, the business office, I'm sorry. Yes, the business office, as well as the addition of someone into communications. Those are the things that I would like, and that's
mean,
what I'd like to have discussed.
I mean, HR.
HR, thank you.
Since we're talking about job descriptions and specific staffing, maybe this should be an executive session discussion?
I'm at the point now where I think we still have 3% on, where are we at? We're still talking about a 3% budget. We're not talking about specific positions. We've kind of done it.
Well, I'm just looking for a number so I can make a motion. Is it 2%? Is it 1.5%?
Right, that's,
I would need to know. I can't even vote on the motion that was made by Director McNeil because I don't know what we're cutting.
But the budget would change, wouldn't it, if you're suggesting adding positions that are not in the budget?
Well, I'm just looking for the number. Like, instead of stabbing in the dark, I'd like to stab in the
Okay,
dark.
so if we were at 3%, and if you wanted to say 2%, we'd cut 1.5 million out, which probably would come out of capital. And if you wanted to drop the budget further to 1.5, it would be another additional about 750,000, which would make us reduce our personnel. It wouldn't cut our personnel totally, but we'd reduce everything down to get to that number.
Again, remember, those are budgeted numbers, not actual revenues and expenditures that we're going to actually have.
That's a game. So the idea is that we're supposed to be having a surplus every year. We never want to have a budget deficit. Successful organizations don't run deficits. That's a game.
Successful
shell
organizations do have losses from time to time.
Successful organizations do not stay in business very long if they have losses.
Well, we haven't had a loss in many, many years.
Well, we're looking at a loss, and you can
We-
conjecture
we-
based
we-
on your, but you
Sure.
failed to show me in numbers how that's true. I would love to see it.
I just explained.
You explained it without any backup. I see no data. I'm supposed to just accept your word, and I appreciate that, but that's not how good decision-making is done.
I used data from our last year's audit, and I used data that was given to us in this presentation on the
I
increase in revenue.
respectfully accept what you're saying, but I haven't done my own investigation, and I need to do that.
Well, who's last minute now?
can I?
Excuse me, you're bringing that motion to me and just accepting me to take your
I-
word as truth. I'm not last minute. You should have told me that a week ago.
Ms. Warhay, could you tell me what motion is on the floor? Is it 3% or
3%
1.5?
is still on the floor.
Did we have an amendment
She
or
didn't
no?
make a second amendment. The first one, the 0% was the first amendment, and that's the one we voted on. If Dr. McNeil would like to, Director McNeil would like to make the motion.
Would you like to
again,
make
she
the
can
second
now make
motion,
another
or-
motion.
Okay.
Have you decided?
I would like to make the motion to keep the budget amount as it is, 244,248,119, with a 1.5% tax increase.
Do I have a second?
Second, Lust?
Okay.
Any other discussion?
Yes. I would just once again like to point out that this proposed amendment will directly impact our personnel, which will impact the mental health supports of our students.
If I understand the motion correctly, we will be pulling money out of our reserves because we haven't changed the budget amount. So it will not do what you're suggesting.
So, yeah, no staffing would be impacted with the budget amount.
Right, the budget number, exactly, is what will be impacted.
And if I remember another slide that looks like this from a previous meeting, even with a tax increase, we're still in the red, is that correct? Even like each of these years, it doesn't bring us back into the blue, does it?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to point that out because we can't just keep going down into the red. You know,
Any other-
I mean, for years, we've needed
Right.
to have a tax increase, and now that we're at this point right here, where we're red, I really think that it's important to consider of finally having a tax increase, and I think that 3% is manageable, and I think that's what we should do.
Any other comments or?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that those future years that we saw already we're already on a different trajectory.
I don't know what that means.
Can you explain that further?
Yes, the expenditures, we've seen an increase in revenues this year, earned income tax, real estate tax, interim tax. Some of the things where that we've seen declines, such as activity fees, interest income, those things are, especially activity fees, are temporary because we hope to have gate receipts again at the football games, et cetera. So already our revenues are over what we've projected, and quite frankly, our expenditures are under. So those out years the trajectory's not there.
Dr. McNeil?
I'd just like to say that I think we owe our constituents who may have been impacted by the pandemic the consideration that they deserve, and not assume that everyone is in a place that, I'll make I statements, that I'm in where I could afford a tax increase. So I think we need to consider that, in addition to the fact that Mr. Mattis did say that among his colleagues, the prospect of a rosier future for revenues, as Director Kring pointed out, is what they are thinking as well. So if we increase taxes somewhat this year in consideration of our constituents, with the expected revenues that we will garner, that we will be in a good place and not in dire straits.
I'd like to motion to amend.
We have one amendment, so we have to vote on it.
Okay.
And then we can, and Director Bluss?
To piggyback on Dr. McNeil, being a pandemic year, I think we have to take that into consideration. And this way, people who are watching know that what our plan is. They can be in touch with us. They can let us know whether or not they support that. They can also say whether they support full-day kindergarten and the 5-6 buildings. So they're looking at the budget and what's going forward. So I think this gives everyone the information, and yet we're still considering those people who are suffering from the pandemic.
So I have a question before we vote then, so I can understand what I'm voting on. We're still going to make those hires. We're just going to have the possibility
That we will have a deficit.
that we will have a deficit next year. Okay.
So
And
where does the money come from? We're not cutting, or we are cutting? Like,
No, we're leaving the budget at that amount.
so the personnel that we have in there, and also the capital is, we have cut it, but where it is where it is. And we're going to take, if
We're
we,
going to take the risk.
we're going to hope we don't have a deficit, and if we do, then we're going to just take it out of fund balance, which
we're
will
gonna
create a
have-
bigger one next year, right?
Right.
Okay.
So in that vein, and I understand what Director Kring is saying, he's saying the projections look a little bit better than what is being indicated. Is that correct?
Quite a bit, yes.
Okay. So in the spirit of compromise and in the spirit of, I believe too that we might have a little bit better. But my question is like, maybe it's 2% the number. Like, it's the stab of the dark. I'd rather err on the side of caution I'm looking for compromise. I'm looking for, measured steps forward with a commitment to ideals that people were elected on, but I also want to be cognizant of creating a bigger debt. And that's why these conversations feel very, like it should have already occurred during planning sessions.
Call the vote, please.
What are we voting on again?
Direct,
1.5.
everybody understand
1.5.
what they're voting on?
We're voting on a 1.5%. That's the motion, the current motion on the table. And if it fails, we can.
No change in the budget.
No change in the budget, 1.5%. If it fails, then Vice President Britton can make her amended motion, or a new motion.
Director Wisdom?
No.
Director Kring?
No.
Director Bluss?
Must admit, I need clarification.
You're voting for, a yes would be a vote of an increase of 1.5%.
Yes.
Director Graham?
No.
Director Houghton?
No.
Vice President Britton?
No.
Director Gibson?
No.
Director McNeil?
Yes.
President Bertoni?
Yes.
The motion fails 6-3.
Okay, in the spirit of compromise and of forward thinking and not tying hands of new board members, but also giving to the community, I'd like to make a motion to have the increase at 2%. Keep the budget as is.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Call the vote, please.
Director Gibson?
No.
Director Kring?
No.
Director Houghton?
Yes.
Director Graham?
Yes.
Director Bluss?
No.
Vice President Britton?
Yes.
Director McNeil?
No.
Director Wisdom?
No.
President Bertoni?
Yes.
The motion fails 5-4.
Well, we're back to 3%. You want to vote on that? It's out there. It was the original motion.
So the original motion is 3%. Any comments or questions? Call the vote?
Director McNeil?
No.
Director Wisdom?
Yes.
Director Bluss?
No.
Director Houghton?
Yes.
Director Graham?
Yes.
Vice President Britton?
Yes.
Director Gibson?
No.
Director Kring?
No.
President Bertoni?
No. So we are at a standstill.
1.75.
2.5. I'd like to amend motion 2.5%. Increase, budget the same.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments? I call the vote, please?
Director Kring?
No.
Vice President Britton?
Yes.
Director McNeil?
No.
Director Gibson?
No.
Director Houghton?
Yes.
Director Bluss?
No.
Director Wisdom?
Yes.
Director Graham?
Yes.
President Bertoni?
No.
I'd like to make a motion 1.75.
I would like to implore upon those board members who are at 0% to give some feeling, or some idea of what a compromise might be. I was comfortable with the 1.5 or 2% because I felt like we were making a compromise to try and meet the needs of the entire board and entire needs of our community. So I'm imploring on those that are saying no to any increase as to what your comfort level is to maybe consider another amount.
1.75.
So who said,
I second 1.75.
who said 1.75?
Me.
All right.
Okay, 1.75.
I said no to all. And I struggle with this. And believe me, I heard the dig made about supporting our students, but not supporting them financially. This is a hard year. We kept our students out of the building all year. And that wasn't our doing, it was with a pandemic. A lot of people did not get the education they need. We have a lot of students who are struggling. I have a very hard time justifying asking our constituents to pay additional money in a year that they did not get the education that they deserved through no fault of their own or our staff.
So to that point, Director Gibson, what I ask you to consider is that it was not anyone's fault. And I'm fearful and I'm looking to ensure that we have money available to run the summer programs that we'll need to run to help bring our students back up where they need to be. And I understand that administration has been working on it. We have not heard about it, but they are working on it. And we will need to make sure that those programs are also funded in addition to the funding for a normal year next year. So, and I think some of these mental health professionals are that much more needed because of the year we've just been through. So again, I'm reaching out to those board members that are struggling and are, at 0%, or, we have a motion on the floor now for 1.75. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
Did I have a second?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have that listed, Ms.? Thank you, Mrs. Lorraine. Did you have a statement?
I want to echo Director Gibson's thoughts because I feel the same way. I didn't want a tax increase last year, and it's hard for me to, approve a tax increase this year knowing that people are hurting. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about mental health. I keep hearing about mental health, and I feel like it's a hard decision to do that this year, but I feel like it's necessary to ensure that we have the resources for our students.
Any other comments or questions?
Just to clarify one.
I'm sorry.
I just want to clarify before we would vote on 1.75. So again, are we still saying not cutting additional personnel or not cutting additional capital? So go 1.75 and then take the rest out of fund balance?
If we do not have the projected
Okay,
revenues,
I just
take it
want to
out of fund
clarify.
balance.
Thank you.
So we are not changing the budget. So I'm concerned with all this verbiage about cutting mental health costs seems to be just a way to put down other board members because they feel some sort of way about not raising our constituents' taxes. We're not cutting mental health. We are keeping it the same. We are not cutting any of the staff out. We're dipping into the $100 million in savings in an effort to keep things fair. We have people in our school district who have 4 children who are living in a hotel room in Exton. We have people who haven't put oil in their heat. They've lived under blankets with a kerosene heater in one room. I mean, these are the things I'm thinking about. And so I'm having a hard time when people are saying we're cutting mental health. We're not. We're keeping all of those staff numbers. We're keeping that staff the same. We are doing those new hires.
So that is, thank you for the clarification. And you're right, the budget's staying the same. I'm concerned about in creating a bigger deficit when we're looking at our long-term plans. Because if we don't build that base now, we won't have it if we choose to go through with some of the plans that we're talking about, and if our community continues to grow. And I have a great deal of empathy, Director Gibson, for the people you just highlighted, but a 1% tax increase is not going to impact them, because if they're living in a hotel, they're not paying property taxes right now. So it's not, this isn't an earned income tax, this is a property tax. So that's why I would like us to come to some kind of compromise.
And that fact isn't lost on me. I am aware of who pays property tax.
Right.
I was only pointing out that why this is like quite difficult.
It is difficult.
I would just like to point out that if we're talking about a 0% tax increase, you can't add staff. So that's a completely different conversation. It doesn't feel fair to take two apples and oranges situations and convolute them into one discussion. That's the first. Second thing is, if we have children who are experiencing ongoing trauma in the form of not having heat, being stuck in their house and isolated, I cannot think of a better way to spend $6 a month than to make sure that I have services in the buildings to help those kids and help every student in that classroom bridge achievement. Because the minute that we have kids coming into rooms and they're in trauma, we have behavioral issues. We have children falling behind. That impacts every single child. So will I make a $6 investment into a child that isn't in trauma, experiencing loss, in poverty? Absolutely. And it will affect every child and every taxpayer in a positive way.
May I ask, Ginny, what was the vote on the 2%? Yes to no?
2%, 5 to 4.
5 to 4. All the votes have been pretty much 5 to 4 or 6 to 3.
1.5 was 6-3.
I'd just like to point out, just because we don't do a tax increase doesn't mean we're not hiring staff. We've hired staff every year that I've been on the board.
We can't hire the staff that we're looking at and not create a giant deficit, and I have yet to see anyone prove.
This conversation is really not productive at this point. Do we have any other comments regarding the budget?
I don't know if this is about the budget, but it seemed to me like 2%, I said no. I'd like to revisit 2% because if this is the way it's going to be, I will say yes to that if we can
I'll
back
remove
to
my
that.
second to the 1.75.
And will you, who made 2% originally?
I did. You can amend, can she amend at this point to 2%?
Well, I removed my
Well,
second.
Director Graham has removed her second, so we need
Removed
a,
her second.
To the 1.75.
to the
So we
1.75.
make the 2
So she removed
The
her
second.
second?
for the 1.75.
So we can.
So what's on the table?
Nothing.
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 do we have a,
I'd like to move then to go, to vote again on 2%.
Second.
Okay, there we go.
call a vote?
Director Houghton,
Yes.
Vice President Britton,
Yes.
Director Wisdom,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
No.
Director Crane,
No.
Director McNeil,
No.
Director Grab,
Yes.
Director Blust,
Because we can lower this between now and May, I'm going to say yes.
President Bertoni.
Yes.
The motion passes 6-3.
So I understand the caveat to Director Bluff's 2% is that you would like the administration to continue looking to try and bring it down to 1.5, or I'm just,
Well, does she have a second? Because that's just.
no, I'm just asking, she said that, you say we cannot, that we're not having discussions prior to.
Vote if we're all going to direct the administration to take those steps. That's all I'm saying. She can't unilaterally decide that we're going to.
I do not, I do not object to us to have continuing to have the
So is
conversation.
that a second?
No,
Well,
there's
it's not a motion,
there's no
we're just
second.
having a
Yeah.
conversation. I'm asking if that's, I'm asking Director Bluff what information she is looking for so that we as a board can determine what direction we would like to give administration. This was not a motion, it was a conversation.
Okay, but she could speak for herself next time, I'll remind you.
I
of
was
that.
asking her to clarify.
Well, she should clarify on her own. Every board member needs to step up and realize their powers and duties.
Thank you, Vice President Bluff. Vice President Britton, for explaining what our roles are.
Thank you. I remember part of the conversation being that we don't have to make this decision until May. I don't have a number in mind, but I know I've had a lot of constituents ask me for no, zero increase. And so I'm just saying, can we be mindful if there's anything that we can remove to have that conversation?
I agree with Director Bluff. Dr. McNeil, do you concur? I'll go around the room.
With what? What
Director
am I
Rizzo?
concurring with?
Whether or not administration
We want to have
continue.
continued discussion. My understanding is we've passed for 2%, but we can still have continued discussion to bring it lower if the board so desires. Correct?
Right, that's right. So when we vote May 12th, then it's final.
So I bring it to you, Dr. Lenardi. Is it something that we need to give you direction on, or do we just have another public discussion and or new business next week?
Well, okay, so first of all, thank you for voting 2% tax increase. We have at least, the preliminary budget's done, and our 30-day clock is ticking, and that's good. So we can make our final decision May 12th. If you would like us to come back next week and just under discussion items, say, okay, here's what we could cut, and just show you a list of those cuts, and you can make some determination whether you like that or not, we can do that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And we still have plenty of time before May 12th.
I think that's important.
Well, no, Director Bluff is saying she's going to ask the question in public discussion.
Okay.
So they can choose to have the information or not. We are
Got it.
trying to give administration some direction so that we don't ask them questions that they don't have answers.
Absolutely.
So in the end,
I'm not opposed to that conversation. I was waiting for the yes, so I can say yes too.
so once we get to that point, the board can then give us direction on those cuts. So we'll bring you that information.
Thank you.
President Bertoni, may I request that Director Kring, the information that he shared with us tonight, he dug more deeply into different things, that we have that information for our discussion? Would that be possible? Can Mr. Mattis, the way you presented it, Director Kring, was very informative, and I think it would inform our discussion next week further, possibly.
I can put something together, sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Director Kring, if you're going to put some information together, I would appreciate some, if you wouldn't mind concurring with Mr. Mattis so
Sure.
that the information is accurate from both lenses.
And can I just say that it feels to me like it should go in an email so that the board can review it, not just to the public, like if that's what's being proposed.
Yeah, that's a
that
good
feels
idea.
completely.
No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
that's
I just want to make sure the information is
Because if that's the case, I'd like to add some information about the importance of mental health in schools and how that affects taxpayers. If we're going to just throw random stuff on the board, I also
That-
like to throw up there.
with all due respect, Vice President Britton, you can send all the articles you want. We've had the discussion. I didn't hear a single board member here say they were not
As long as
interested.
it's not going
They
to
were
be
not
presented
inter-
to the public at this juncture without the board having input. I feel like that's wrong. No sooner would the board want me directing what should go up on the board? I don't want other people to have that ability either.
It's going to go in an email, though. It's going to go in an email.
It's going to go in an email. Yeah, we just discussed that it would go in an email and it would be accurate financial information that would be available. That's why I asked Mr. Director Kring and Mr. Mattis to make sure they're on the same
I
page.
would appreciate that. I would love to see this.
Okay, I think we got this.
Any other items that require the attention of the board? Yes, Director Graham.
Thank you. I would like to recognize that this year has been a financial struggle for many families within the Downingtown area school district due to the pandemic. I think we all acknowledge that. I would like to make sure that our community knows about the Pennsylvania Property Tax Rent Rebate Program, which benefits eligible Pennsylvanians age 65 and older, widows and widowers age 50 and older, and people with disabilities age 18 and older. You can find more about it on the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue website, or contact your local state representative's office for assistance. I would also like to make a proposal that our business office investigates a Downingtown area school district tax rebate program to be held in conjunction with the state rebate program. Many districts in our area, including O&J Roberts, Wissahickon, North Penn, Pocono Mountain, and Neshaminy, have created programs to give additional support to qualified stakeholders. It is important to see how such programs will impact our budgets, but it also can be incredibly impactful to our families who are struggling the most. I would like to propose that we have a discussion about such program at the June Committee of the Whole meeting if the board is willing.
Do you want to speak to that, Mr. Mattis?
Proposal.
Yeah, no, I know, it's, go ahead, speak to it. Yeah, since we already do it.
We currently have a program in place for senior citizens that they can earn up to, I believe it's $600 for volunteering in the schools. So I don't know if it's something in addition to that or.
It is. Most of the programs that I have mentioned are actually all of them are a financial based program. The percentages of a rebate varies from district to district. Some of them is 30%. Most of them do have max caps. But it is something that I think that our district in particular can certainly look into.
Wait, is it different from what we're already doing?
Yes, it's not a volunteer system. It is a eligibility program.
Just rebates?
Yes.
So the expectation is it's not going to be part of this year's
Nope.
budget.
No.
So could I request that you send the information you're talking about to Mr. Mattis and Dr. McNeil and Director Houghton, as they're the finance people, and let them review it? And I don't see any objection if they so see the importance of it, which I have no doubt that they will, that it become part of we can do it perhaps at the June meeting.
That is perfectly fine.
Or even July at this point, depending on what's on the agenda for June, because that's graduation and there's a lot going
Yep.
on there. So
I just wanted,
we have a little time.
yes, we definitely have some time. I just wanted our community to know that we do recognize the challenges that they are facing and that there are things that we can do to help them.
Thank you. No,
Thank you.
I agree. And that way we'll let the finance committee look at it. Director Gibson.
Yes, just to clarify, the current program, the volunteer program, just so people are aware, that program's currently on hold, correct?
Well, because they can't
Because of
volunteer
COVID.
this year.
Right.
Right, I just want to be clear so we don't have, a whole bunch of people saying, hey, I want to volunteer in the schools, and then we're like, oh, wait, no, you can't do that. So for right now, for this year, we do not have the volunteer program for the tax rebate.
Very valid point. Thank you. All right. Okay, visitors. Doc, there's no visitors? Thank you. The next committee of the whole meeting is right after this, and then on May 5th at 6:30, and our next regular school board meeting is scheduled for next week, April 14th at 6:30 PM. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Do we want to take?
I'm all about rolling, but everybody thinks you're okay.
Is everyone okay? Do we want a 5-minute break, or can we go right into?
Okay,
It's hard with math.
let's just go.
Okay. Committee of the whole, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Can I have approval of the minutes for March 3rd?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Dr. Lenardi, school update.
Okay, this is our pandemic update. So Kevin, if you put it up, thank you so much. And we just have, sometimes we do long ones. This one is a short one. We just have a little bit, a few updates. And so if you go to the agenda slide, here's some of the things that I just want to review. Most of them you've already seen. I want to say them out loud for our public. And of course, the metrics are new each week. So here's our Chester County metrics. If you go with week 4, remember they're oldest to newest. So we were at 73, we jumped to 96, we jumped to 120, we jumped to 181. So that was an awful last week. However, I will tell you that this Monday, we were at 189, and that's the highest. And then Tuesday, we were at 175, and I just got today's figures, we were at 161. So maybe we're coming back down again, and maybe that was the peak that they had talked about. So I just wanted to share that with you. I will tell you that my recent meeting with the health department had, they're not recommending, there was 3 weeks before we came back in full. They are not recommending that schools change their instructional model after 3 weeks of high. And this would, we likely will have 3 weeks of high. They want us to continue to watch it, look at it, and provide closures if there's transmission within given schools. So right now, I don't anticipate any changes in the near future. And hopefully these numbers begin to go down. So they are our current metrics. The vaccination, I just wanted to update everyone. And so our teachers from March, actually all staff from March, and you, March 12th through March 27th were vaccinated. So anyone who wanted to be vaccinated got vaccinated. The IU reports that from Downingtown, we had 1,133 staff vaccinated. So that's not all of our staff, but a number of our folks got vaccinated in other places. So it's hard to tell what that accurate number is. We're trying to figure out how to get a good number of that without being invasive with people, but it would help us to know that. The latest conversation, and you see it says /students. We've been talking about antigen testing and Q testing, and now they're talking about possibly getting students 16 and older vaccination. So in the high schools in Chester County, which would be awesome. We'd have to, of course, get parent permission, but we're saying that we could do it right in school. At first they said maybe students could go to the IU, and we said, no, that's not a good thing. We need to do it right on site where it would be easy and we could make it happen. So, and they would, of course, provide some staff to assist us in doing that. So that is just hot off the press. The IU is looking into it, and if we can do that with students 16 years of age or older, as soon as it goes to 12 to 16, we hopefully can jump on that and assist there. So that's really refreshing to know, and our high school principals believe that that would really be a morale booster for our high school teachers. So that's just more on that later. I don't have very much information just yet. Okay, next, the quarantine guidance.
So the Chester County Health Department does offer an alternative quarantine option. They do currently still recommend the 14-day quarantine period when a person is exposed to a positive or a probable case of COVID. So these are just for close contacts. This is not for people who have tested positive. So for close contacts, as I said, they currently recommend 14 days, but they do give 2 other options. Option 2 is to give a 10-day symptom-free period of quarantine. And then option 3 would be a 7-day period of quarantine, and in both cases, you must remain symptom-free, but 7 days would require a negative test. The test needs to be taken after day 5, and in all of these cases, symptoms must be continually monitored for the full 14 days. And if somebody in one of our schools wanted to follow either of these alternative quarantine periods, the 10-day option or the 7-day option, they would be required to provide documentation. If they're not comfortable providing their test results, then they are required to do the 10-day symptom-free or the 14-day. Go to the next slide. For vaccinated close contacts, there's a little bit of a change here. If a close contact comes in contact with if a person comes in contact with a positive or a probable positive case, which would cause them to be a close contact, they do not need to quarantine under the following qualifications. Number 1, they must be fully vaccinated, which means greater than or equal to 2 weeks after their last vaccination dose. That would be for the Johnson & Johnson, it would be 2 weeks after the one dose, or for the other, the Pfizer or the Moderna, it would be after your second dose. And in addition to that, they must have remained asymptomatic since their exposure. Just another caveat, if you've tested positive in the past 3 months and have recovered fully and you do not have symptoms, that is another reason why a close contact would not be required to quarantine. Again, in this case, if you would like to follow that, we are requiring documentation. Now, as Dr. Lenardi stated, our students are not likely going to fall into this category. This is most likely going to be our staff that would be impacted by this. And then we have on the next slide, just some updated quarantine guidance related to travel. As you may have heard, the governor has lifted the state-to-state quarantine requirement, so there's no quarantine required if you're traveling interstate. However, traveling internationally, this was just updated by the CDC, and the Chester County Health Department does recommend that we follow the CDC recommendations here. If you're unvaccinated, we are requiring a negative test that is taken 3 to 5 days after travel and quarantine for 7 days after travel, or they must quarantine for 10 days outright if they do not want to take a test. Again, if they want to follow this, they must provide documentation. And the caveat that was just added over this past spring break was that vaccinated individuals are still required to get that test, but they are not required to quarantine.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shealy. Next, rapid antigen testing and Q testing updates. Ms. Dennis.
Thank you. So for the rapid antigen testing, we have made our first sort of outreach to staff to see who's interested in participating in the rapid antigen testing. So again, this is the surveillance testing, where we would be testing the same people on a weekly basis to look at those sort of longitudinal numbers as far as transmission. So we had a limited response at that first email. We did start by targeting particularly low incidence in special education classrooms, as is the guidance of the Chester County Health Department, is to focus on people who are in close contact with students that struggle to wear masks or maintain social distance. So that was our rationale for starting with that cohort. The limited response was really varied. We had some buildings where we didn't have anyone fill out the survey. We had some buildings where 7 or 8 people filled out the survey. We did get some feedback from staff regarding their decision-making process and whether or not to participate. The main reason that we received is that they're already vaccinated, so many of them feel like the timing of the rapid antigen testing is off because we've already completed that vaccination for them, and they don't feel the need to have themselves tested on a regular basis to monitor whether or not they're positive for COVID. Additionally, it does bear some risks to it. If you do test positive, then you would have to go home and get a follow-up assessment in order to determine whether or not you are positive, and so it impacts their ability to come to work every day. So those are some of the reasons that we've heard back from staff as to why they're not volunteering. We did send an additional email sort of widening the net to find additional staff that would be willing to participate. So that was sent out today, and so we'll monitor those results and see how many of those come back. We've requested the test from Chester County Intermediate Unit. We're just waiting on our pickup time to go and get them and deliver those to buildings. Dr. Lenardi shared with me at a recent meeting that the Department of Health is recommending that we do some student testing for students that are symptomatic. So that's sort of our next stepping stone. We have a draft of permission slips for parents, so it does require permission for us to provide those to students. So we have that drafted, and additionally, students have to register on the CHOP website. So when you provide the test, the results get submitted there. So once you're registered, you get a QR code. So every time the nurse tests you, she scans your QR code. That's how the data gets into the system. So when we start to communicate with parents, they have to provide that to us as well as register at this website and then provide us their QR code so that we can manage that and monitor that if a student were to come to the nurse's office with symptoms relevant to COVID. In regards to the Q testing, we still haven't had a timeline for the delivery of materials. However, Dr. Lenardi gave me a lead on somebody yesterday that might have the instruments that we need in order to provide those. So I've reached out to them today to see if they still have those materials available. We did submit to CHOP the MOA that you all had agreed upon in the previous board meeting, so we're all ready for that. They had that information. Tomorrow, they're having a sort of webinar on the Q testing and how all the logistics of that work. So myself and the nurse curriculum leader will be attending that meeting to gather some more information. We did get the training materials, so we will be providing the training for the Q testing to our nurses on the April 14th PD day.
Okay, and I think someone on the board asked about cases in close contact, so we thought we'd give you a couple of graphs on this, and Ms. Hankins has done the lion's share of the work on this.
So this is a version of the staff versus student in-school COVID cases. The teal color is students, the dark blue is staff. You'll see in March there was an increase due to the change in the 3 to 6 foot rule. The next slide is a listing of the close contacts for in-school cases. Again, March, there's an increase with the distancing of the cases for the close contacts.
Oh. They should have been under other, before we ended.
We did want to let you know that the staff and student information will be tracked on the district website on the dashboard. It'll be updated on a monthly basis.
Okay, and the final thing on here is just a reminder that our clubs did begin on April 6th in person. DCEF, we said, could start their spring classes in person. Of course, they've been virtual. And rentals we're opening up our outside rentals for the summertime. And one of our problems is it's been very difficult for our spring sports to play due to if one of the teams have a COVID outbreak or if there's a rain out. And so we're trying to use our fields and courts for us right now to get through the season. And as soon as that's done, we'll open up. I think the tennis courts are what's most in demand. So as soon as we get through, usually around the second or third week in May, when that season is completed, then we'll open it up. So we're getting there. But if people ask you about that, we're getting close. So that completes our update for this week. Any questions for any of the cabinet members?
For the rapid antigen testing, I guess I have two questions. Would it make more sense to create a form for parents to opt out of testing?
They are required to provide active permission, so it can't be passive.
Okay.
It has to be an active permission.
All right, wonderful. And are there any discussions about creating student cohorts for screening testing so we can help eliminate some of these potential close contacts and create a larger group of our population that is being screened?
We've not talked about cohorting students at this time. Again, I think that conversation would require us to really talk additionally about staffing. So we've tried to be mindful of our nurses' time as they are also contact tracing. We also are still required to provide all of our health screenings as we do in typical years. And so that's created additional work for our nurses as we're trying to maintain social distancing and do that in a very safe way so that we can, fulfill all of our requirements without overwhelming them. So I think if we want to have discussions about, increasing and doing a large number of testing every week, that's a conversation about how we support that in the buildings.
Any other?
Okay, that completes the report.
President Bertoni, I had a question.
Oh,
So
sorry.
it was, I think it was the first slide that Ms. Shealy reviewed, and I just wondered, no, not that one, the one prior, that one. So is this something that administration is deciding? Like, where are we with this? The recommendation is 14 days, and we have two options. So where are we as a district with what we're doing?
We're allowing any of them.
And when you say we, that means it's up to the building?
No, it's up to the parent, really. They're the three options. They could either stay out for 14, stay out for 10, or stay out for 7 with the test. And so we're saying the parent can decide.
Okay, and so when they come in after 7 days symptom-free with a negative test, they show that to the nurse?
Correct.
Thank you.
That concludes? Folks, we evidently had 3 people that wanted to make statements, and we probably should have let them do it at the end of the last meeting. And since it's 3, I'm going to let them come in now, rather than wait till the end of this meeting.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you.
I thought he shook his head no.
There was nobody that wanted to talk about the budget.
Oh, that's good. Okay, he was confused.
He got it a little.
Yeah, he thought that meant all, yeah, gotcha.
Because I sent him a text saying there was nobody out there, and he said there was 3. That's why I thought, I'll let them know.
It's nice night up there.
Yeah.
It's not, we didn't freeze them, not freezing.
Who's ever up first?
I'd like to apologize. We should have let you in at the end of the last meeting, so we'll let you speak now before this meeting ends.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. My name's Lisa Sturbridge. I'm a resident of East Brandywine Township. I came here tonight because I wanted to make a request for the district to strongly consider testing students in our buildings. And I also wanted to share a concern, or 2 concerns that I have related to how the district is reporting positive COVID cases and the time lapse related to those cases, as well as the way that the district requested feedback from parents and staff with respect to the surveys that were previously submitted. I feel like overall, the request for, feedback was targeted, it was worded poorly, and was designed to meet the district's objective, as opposed to soliciting honest and, dialogue feedback that actually gave parents permission or options, as opposed to this really terribly worded yes or no to get to the outcome that the school district wanted, okay? But very specifically, my request for adding testing into our schools is to recognize that there's a significant increase that's been happening over these last couple of weeks of COVID cases in our school. This, testing was required by the Chester County Health Department as part of the district's reopening plan, and specifically, the district received a waiver from the state where testing was outlined to be part of that reopening plan. We have to recognize that testing is recommended by all major scientific governing bodies to have early detection of COVID in our community to reduce that spread. Right now, testing has been widely available, so there's no excuse not to be doing it. In addition, there's no cost to the school district for performing that testing. So if we want to support this claim that you guys keep saying over and over again that there's not community spread in our schools, let's back that up with some actual science and some data that shows that. We're a district that really likes to express our pride in our STEM center and our, scientific approach to things, but we're not using science to make these very significant fundamental claims about spread in our schools. I also wanted to say that, we all recognize that there's an increase in positivity rates. These rates have been increasing now for 3 weeks. So based on the reopening plan, we're at a point where with 3 weeks of increase in trends, we have to reevaluate our reopening plan. So this is literally the time to figure out how can we get a handle on this? How can we collect real data and make science, fact-based decisions on how we can slow down this spread and keep our kids and our staff safe? So I'm urging you to incorporate testing in our future, in the next week's board meeting, to bring to the table some sort of discussion on testing in our schools. My next comments are related to how parents are notified of positive cases. You know, I see this dashboard, I follow it closely. I'm a parent with 2 elementary age kids and 1 middle school kid. I'm getting those notices all the time, and literally multiple notices per week. Right now, I'm choosing to keep my elementary kids at home because I don't think it's safe for them to be in the building. But as a parent, I cannot make what I believe is an informed decision on when to send them back because your dashboard has not been accurate with reporting the number of at-home and in-school cases. We've asked for clarifying numbers all the time, and we get those clarifications. But again, the fact that we can't do simple data reporting accurately, it doesn't allow me as a parent to make an informed decision for what I think is best for my family. And not only that, it reduces the lack of transparency and trust that we have in our school district to keep our children and our staff safe. So I'm finding it very frustrating as a parent that I can't get accurate information from the school on something that's so paramount, from the school district that's so paramount on what's safe for our community. My last comment is related to the surveys that you submitted to the parents asking about if we'd be sending our kids back with the reduced spacing. It's completely inconceivable to me that it was like, will you send your kids back with 3-foot spacing, yes or no? There was no dialogue. There was no alternative evaluations. It was a simple, here's the decision we've already made, regardless of what you as a parent, are interested in doing, and yes or no, are you on board? So I don't believe that that's a decision or an opportunity for input or dialogue. It was, I think, a very poorly worded survey, and I think, again, you guys can do better with how you choose to do that. At every step of the, decision-making process, I feel like there's been a decision that's already been made, and your attempts to solicit feedback have been, directly modified and restricted to get the answer that you're already going to proceed, but you were able to, quote, check the box that you got community feedback. So I've been very disappointed in this opportunity for community engagement that's been presented to date.
Thank you. Your 5 minutes are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want me to keep the time again?
Yes, please.
I'll do it.
Hi, I'm Tara Harlander, Upper Euclid, Region 2. 8 days. That is how long it took us from the start of full in-person learning for the Department of Health to shut down one of our high schools. 8 days of causing disruption to our high schoolers, sending home hundreds of students as close contacts, and allowing those students to possibly bring COVID home to their loved ones. 8 days to realize that our safety measures had failed and could start failing in other schools as well. Wouldn't it be great if we had some way to reduce those quarantines and see less school closures for the duration of this pandemic? Well, there is, and it's called routine testing, because routine testing works. We know that weekly testing of all students and staff, both asymptomatic and symptomatic, will reduce in-school cases and reduce the number of kids needing to quarantine. Universities, private schools, whole states and countries have been doing this for months as a way to keep their COVID levels low. And it is available to us now free of charge with almost no work to our schools. It is a simple, self-administered test that even a first grader can do. It is scanning barcodes and putting tubes in boxes. It is dropping that box in the mail. It is results being posted on a dashboard the following day for the community to use that information. It is confirmation of positives. The end. If our safety measures are not adequate, routine testing will fill those gaps. And if they are, the schools are as safe as everyone here says they are, then adding free testing still has no downside. It can be used as an assurance to parents that their child will not bring COVID home to their loved ones, that they can safely participate in extracurriculars, that we can get closer to normal than we've ever been able to get to before. So why is Downingtown saying no? Why does our administration continue to ignore our emails informing them of these benefits and programs. What are they afraid of? Why do they present us with falsehoods regarding the efficacy and availability of testing to make it seem like they are doing what the county asked them to do, when in fact they are absolutely not? Instead, they continue to do the bare minimum and rely on support from people who cherry-pick quotes from experts which support their agenda of bare minimum. Well, those experts all agree that routine testing is necessary. The county agrees. Emily Oster agrees. Rubin and Coffin agree. The state and the CDC agree. There is no guidance that does not strongly encourage routine testing as an added mitigation layer. The layer of distance has now been removed, and not surprisingly, the number of students sent home as a result have skyrocketed. Our community incidence rates have skyrocketed. Say what you will about schools not being a place where the virus can be transmitted. It doesn't matter if you follow science or if you believe that small people are magically, biologically different from adults. The bottom line is that testing will help. One last point. I find it ironic that while we have been asking Downingtown to implement a COVID testing program, we've also been discussing the timing of PSSA testing programs. I find it ironic that while the district has the authority to and no reservations about enrolling our children by default into PSSA testing, which many of us do not want and are now opting out of, they refuse to provide our children with a COVID testing program, which many of us do want, and parents could just as easily opt out of those tests if they want to. This seems to me to be one more example of many where the district does what they want to promote their own agenda, with zero regard for the needs of the families they serve. We see this every year with their lack of seeking out and considering parent feedback, and we see it again now. If you want to prove me wrong, by all means, please do so by giving us our COVID testing program.
Thank you.
My name's Heather Barrett from West Bradford. I'm not a stay-at-home forever parent. I'm a parent who wants our children safely in school, but I'm also willing to take some responsibility for their education during a global pandemic. I'm not afraid. I shop, my family eats at restaurants, and my kids play with others. As a community divided in unprecedented times, we disagree about the best way to keep our children safe while providing equal education for all. Our children are back in school at less than 6 feet, many because they felt they had no choice. Our community transmission rates have soared, and as many cases of in-school cases have been reported in the last 12 days as the previous 50 days combined. It is painfully clear that our community is not ready for the responsibility that comes with having reduced distancing in our schools. Letters go out, each stating that no in-school transmission has taken place without any solid proof. In many cases, there hasn't even been enough time to tell if the exposed students will test positive. And all the while, we wait to see if the district's gamble with our students' lives will pay off or, God forbid, ends badly. Regardless of which side you're on, we all seem to agree that the lack of transparency demonstrated by this administration throughout this process is troubling. From the shell game of a dashboard to the twisting of words and deliberate omission of information presented at board meetings, this administration has been less than honest with its stakeholders. One area of particular concern is testing. We have yet to receive a straight answer on what happened to the testing that was promised as part of the vote to reduce social distancing in our schools. On January 22nd, without prompting from the state or any formal waiver process, Dr. Fiore, Executive Director of the CCIU, sent an email to the Secretary of Education and the Health Director on behalf of the Chester County and Delaware County school districts. This email was a result of several meetings between superintendents and the CCIU, as well as Jeannie Franklin, Director of the CCHD. The purpose of the email, sent by Dr. Fiore, was to seek approval from the state to use the Chester County Health Department's local guidance in place of the attestation, Let me be clear. This was not a waiver process. This was not prompted by the state. This was an unsolicited request made on behalf of the superintendents. Coincidentally, within a few weeks of this request, the CCHD also lowered its safety requirements for school. I digress. As a result, as evidence to support this request to escape the oversight by the state, Dr. Fiore stated that the health department had several things in place in Chester County. Number 8 on that list is participation in Project ACE-IT, sponsored by CHOP, which provides access to binaxinal antigen cards and Q COVID-19 test systems for early detection and viral reduction. This testing was sold to the state as one of the safety measures we supposedly had in place. If that is true, why hasn't testing been implemented in DASD? A second area of increased transparency is the notification process and dashboard. We deserve to know the number of students quarantined. We deserve to see all of the data, both in and out of school, in one place, and not just the past 2 weeks' worth. There are many examples of informative and transparent dashboards out there. With a little research, I'm sure our highly paid administrators can figure it out. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention our teachers. This administration's treatment of our teachers has been shameful at best. Poor planning and the desire to pretend that everything is normal put our teachers in the impossible position of teaching 2 cohorts at once. The lack of concern for their health all along, but most notably packing their classrooms full of kids when they were weeks away from being vaccinated, is deplorable, especially when our superintendent won't even step foot in our schools. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. And now they are at risk of losing their virtual Fridays, the only day when the students get to physically see their teachers smile, the only day they're able to reach all of their students in one place, the only day they connect one-on-one with their fully virtual students. This is the absolute least you can do. Give them their virtual Fridays.
Thank you. Personnel Committee report. Director Graham?
Thank you, President Bertoni. The consent agenda item is request approval for the personnel items. The action agenda item is request renewal of an agreement with Swift MD for telemedicine benefits. Total cost is $3.41 per employee per month. That is no increase in fee. And the contract dates are July of this year through June of next year.
Anyone have any questions?
That concludes my report.
Thank you.
I do. I have a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Ms. Hankins, can you just explain what the telemedicine benefits are and why they wouldn't be under, why it's a supplemental benefit not included in the regular medical benefits package?
Well, it is for benefit eligible employees. It's an added benefit to employees to not have to go to their primary care physician. It does save the district money, and it is a lower cost. There's a no copay for staff.
Thank you. And the savings last year, what did you had said, you had listed that?
The estimated savings were $286,000 for June into June of 2020. For July to January of 2021, we're at about $105,000 savings. And that is lower based on COVID. There have been less flu and other treatments due to just people being locked down and masks and what have you. So the fact that primary care offices may have offered telemedicine appointments during the pandemic also would have decreased that number.
So that's the net after you take out the $3.41?
So the total cost to the district is around $50,000.
Okay.
But the savings is obviously significantly higher.
Is that okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Curriculum Committee report, Director Bluss?
Thank you, President Bertoni. Consent agenda items. Request approval of the purchase of 80 textbooks and 6 and a 6-year digital license for AP World History at both East and West. Total cost, $12,400. The budget year is the coming year, 2021. Request approval for the following foreign exchange trip. Downingtown East and Downingtown West, grades 11 and 12. Denmark foreign exchange, April 22nd to May 1st, 6 days of classes missed. Dr. Chance, I have a question for you on this. It mentions that this is an exchange trip. Does that mean that there are Danish students coming here?
Yes, that is traditionally how it happens. And for what it's worth, you'll notice that this isn't until next year.
Correct.
Just a reminder that our foreign field trips require approval a full year in advance, which is why it's on the agenda. If we're not able to go for any reason, of course, we won't go. And this is actually a trip that was canceled last year as a result of COVID. So, but yes, there is an exchange involved there.
And would that be why it's not over a holiday period, or because it's an exchange with another group of students and we had to
Yes.
consider their schedule as well?
That's correct. Correct.
Okay.
Because you usually see them at a football game.
Okay.
They stay with this, they trade dogs, so.
Do we have any idea how many students this might involve?
I don't off the top of my head. I could put in
I
a board
think it's
update
about
prior years,
24.
but it's typically, yeah.
How many did you say?
It's usually between 20 and 24.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Thank you. Request approval for the donation, disposal, and sale of the following items that are up on the screen. Action agenda items. Request approval of the settlement agreement and release with a parent of a DAS student. Total cost for the coming year, $14,805. And for the following year, $43,885. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Policy Committee report, Director Houghton.
Thank you, President Petroni. We currently have 3 policies that are out for 30-day review. And then moving on to new business, we have AG1 and AG3 of Policy 203 regarding immunizations and communicable diseases. We have made minor updates that align with our AGs from the guidance of the CDC and the PA Department of Health. Both documents were reviewed by our Pupil Services Department and the nurse curriculum leader. Do we have any questions regarding new business? And then moving on, we have one discussion item, and that is Policy 304, Employment of District Staff. This policy reflects the changes that we discussed in our meeting, and I will go through those changes. Those changes are, so we're narrowing the definition of family member. So this is the nepotism policy that we discussed last month. And so for family member, what is being recommended is that we remove uncle, aunt, any step relationship of these individuals, any marital relationship, including niece, nephew, in-law, guardian, ward, and cousin.
The one thing I looked at this, and the one thing I just don't understand is that you leave in-law in there, but you take out niece, nephew, and cousin. And in my mind, niece, nephew, and cousin is a little closer than an in-law. So, it's semantics. I am concerned because I brought forth the issue of, some of the custodians who's, the head custodian the supervisor married into the family, and now these guys aren't eligible because you included in-law. So I guess I would respectfully ask that you bring such a hire to us, because we've always said you could bring it to us, or you take in-law out. I don't.
Do you want us to take in-law out? Would you prefer that we just take in-law out?
Well, if you're going to take aunt, uncle, you're taking aunt,
we could do that.
I don't understand why you left in-law.
Yeah, we could do
And
that.
I would like to know if we're hiring niece, nephew, aunt, and uncle. I'm still uncomfortable. I think it's a pretty close stretch at the administrative level. I
Still wouldn't allow them to report directly to a family member, correct?
Correct. The stipulation was if you were being hired, the in-law would still be considered, but once you're employed, if you're the in-law, then you could still be promoted. We would have to find a different supervisor if it was in the same department. for the situation
But they
that
were
you're
told,
referring.
yeah, they could have a different supervisor, but they were told that because he's now the supervisor, they can't apply. That doesn't seem
We've
fair.
adjusted the wording for that.
I'm sorry?
We have adjusted the wording for that so that he could potentially
But
be
at
considered.
any time, we've always said you could bring exceptions. So
The wording wasn't as lengthy or as, I guess, direct in the opinion of the administration at the time, so.
I also, just my own, and the rest of the board may not agree. I think wherever possible, we should not have related teachers working in the same building, related aides working in the same building. Where we have multiple buildings where we can separate people, I think it just makes it more comfortable. At one time, we had 2 teachers in a building, a mother and her daughter, and if parents had problems with one teacher, they were petrified in 2 years that they were going to have the relative. So just from dynamics, I would ask that we be sensitive to that.
Yeah, I think in cases where we're aware, we're definitely sensitive to it.
Yeah. So going forward, so. Anyone else have any questions about this? So you'll put it on next month's agenda as a new policy?
Yes. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Technology Committee, Director Crane.
Thank you, President Bertoni. Action agenda items, request approval to renew the Schoology Learning Management System for the 21-22 school year. Total cost not to exceed $67,000.
Director Kring, I had a question. Why are we approving a renewal just at Lionville Middle School? Doesn't that come out for the whole district, Schoology?
Learning management system is LMS.
I'm sorry?
It's not Lionville Middle School. It's Learning Management System.
Schoology Learning Management System, the acronym is LMS, not Lionville, sorry.
I missed that, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion, we change the name of Lionville Middle School.
I'd like to amend the motion.
Any questions? Any other questions? Item 2, request approval to purchase hardware with installation services to upgrade 64 network racks and cabling in the migration of 10 gigabyte per second capacity. Total cost not to exceed $150,000. Dr. Matei, do you want to just give a little bit of?
Yeah, absolutely. This is for upgrades in 12 schools as we go to 10 gigabit. These racks are actually mounted to the wall. The original racks were installed in the early 90s, so they have well exceeded their end of life. These new ones should last about 20 years, and the reason actually for the new ones is the new switches are just bigger. Technology is bigger, the equipment is bigger, power over Ethernet requires a bigger rack. This is year 1 of a multi-year project towards 10 gig.
Thank you. Any other questions? Action item number 3, request approval to purchase a Liebert in-row cooling system with installation for the Network Operations Center. Total cost not to exceed $80,000. Understand is to cool the equipment, but if you want to give a little.
Yes, so the NOC is here in central office. That's our Network Operations Center. The existing cooling unit is over 10 years old. It's actually a residential grade unit. It's ducted, it's up on the roof. It's not very efficient. It hasn't been efficient. So this new system is one of 3 for inline cooling, which adds cool air and extracts hot air right from the rack. It's only about that wide. It's right in the middle of the servers. It's very efficient. It will last at least 15 years with regular maintenance.
Any other questions? Concludes my report.
Thank you. Finance Committee report. Dr. McNeil.
Thank you, President Bertoni. Number 1, the consent agenda items. Number 1, we request approval of the following student activity club. Downingtown High School East, class of 2024. Number 2, request approval to exonerate the following tax liens. The liens on the following parcels have been deemed uncollectible by the County of Chester County Tax Claim Bureau. I think that should read. And the total amount to be exonerated is $1 million, that is, $1,884.61. And number 3, request approval of the following budget transfers.
Does this mean our charter school costs were higher this year because of the pandemic? Is that what because it's coming from a reserve fund?
It's our typical budget process.
Oh, okay.
We estimate the number of students in charter schools, and we keep a certain amount in contingency, and then
All right.
pull that out.
So it's not in addition to what this is just, how does this compare to last year?
Up slightly, because we had some of our students went to charter schools, but minimal.
Oh, thank you.
Next, action agenda items. Number 1, request approval of the 2021-2022 Chester County Intermediate Unit Core Services budgets in the amount of $31,006,260. And Downingtown's share of that budget is $93,730.
And that's not an increase, right?
That is no increase, right? And number 2, request approval of the 2021-2022 Chester County Intermediate Unit Occupational Education budget in the amount of $29,460,271. And Downingtown's share of that budget is $2,830,767.
Is that also no increase?
Was there an increase there? No.
No increase.
Based on a 3-year average, I think, is it, of what we use.
And we still pay, I mean, do we use their services this year, or we paid it because,
This is for,
unlike the bus company, we couldn't renegotiate?
this is for VOTEC services, so yes, we did use their services.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Facilities report, Vice President Burton.
Thank you, President Bertoni. Consent agenda item number 1. Request approval for a change order. This is a deduct to Cyprium Solutions, electrical contractor on the Euclid Hills Elementary School new construction project, for an adjustment in contract value to account for an unused portion of remaining allowance. We're getting a credit, $27,368.15. Moving on to action agenda items. Number 1, request approval to provide a purchase order to 3B Services under PA CoStars for the design and replacement of boilers, expansion tank, and hot water heater at Lionville Elementary School. Total cost, $383,700. That concludes my report.
Thank you.
I
Is
just
there any additional?
point out that, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just point out that that is actually a capital projects improvement for next year that we had taken out and were able to put back in.
Oh, excellent.
Are there any additional action or discussion items? The next school board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, April 14th at 6:30, and our next committee of the whole is scheduled for Wednesday, May 5th at 6:30 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone want to stay? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.